Hey guys, this is Abba with CoffeeNCode. Today we'll be looking at enums. Enums are used when you want to use an integer to represent a string, and it makes it easier when you're passing it into functions so you can represent an integer instead of a string, so it makes your program a little bit more efficient and it maintains very well for the future. So let's get started. We can make a public enum by typing public, followed by the word enum, and then followed by the variable name that you want. In essence, we have created a new data type called months, and we can give it values inside. So we can type Jan and Feb and so on, and now I'll just continue the rest and resume the video. Perfect, now we've got all the months in the year, separated by commas, and the last one doesn't need a comma because it's the last in the list. Now we've created our months data type, we can make a variable out of it, so we can type months, followed by the variable name, and we can make it equal to January. Now we can just do a console.writeline that just prints that month, and let's see what happens. So now it says Jan, which makes sense because we have the month Jan specified here. Now, in order to turn the January and February and all of these months into their integers, we use this thing called casting. And casting is kind of like converting. Because we know behind the scenes that these are integer variables, as it says here, they're equal to a static number, 4, 5, 6, and so on, then we can place a bracket int before it, and this just means it tries to convert this variable as an integer, and then we print it out using the console.writeline. So if we run that again, then we get 0. Now this is going to be a problem in our case, because we know that January is not the 0 month. It's actually the first month, and December is 12 instead of 11. So you don't want to always remember to put things like +1 at the end, so then you get your 1. That's going to be too sloppy, and you'll always forget this when you're doing your program. So the best thing to do is to say Jan equals 1, and then all of them will continue from here. So then you don't have to write Feb equals 2, March equals 3, because as you can see in the tooltip, they all just continue. If you wanted to, just for belt and braces purposes, then you can add that in. I personally like to, so I'm just going to quickly add that in now. There we go. So you can add them in just to be sure, because just in case if you add another one in here, then you don't want this one to override any potential values, and then it'll mess up your code, because you can just add another one in here, and you can always give the value of 100, and this will stay 5, and this will stay 6. If you didn't give this a value, then it'll mess up the flow, and you won't really understand, and some of your code might fail. So it's always best to give them values, just in case you want to change something in the future. If you just have a specific case like this, where you don't think it will ever change because you won't just suddenly have a new month, then you could leave all of the equals and just make sure you include the first one, so then February starts on 2 and March starts on 3 and so on. So really you only need to include the equals 1 on the first one. You have a bit more flexibility if you insert the values here. So now that we've converted from an enum to an integer, as shown here, now we have the proper value. So now we don't have to worry about adding 1 to it. So now that we've converted from the enum over to integer, let's try do it the other way around. So let's do a print line to the user, and we can say please enter a value between 1 Jan and 12 December. And then we can have a console write that just says month. So now we can just create a month input variable, and we could say convert to int32 and place the console.readline inside of here. If you're unfamiliar with this notation, please click in the banner above to a video where I talk through it. So now if we just print the month input just to make sure that we're on the right lines, 12 gives us back 12. Now we don't need this line of code anymore, but let's keep it commented just to see the notation. So here we were converting from the enum value into an integer, and now we want to convert from an integer to the enum value. So we can take this integer notation and place it in here, and now we don't need to convert from an integer to an integer, we need to go from integer to the enum, so we can change this to months. And now if we run the program and press in 12, we can see December. So nothing right now is validating the range between 1 and 12, so if we run the program and type 15, then we don't obviously have a 15th month, so the conversion just appears at 15 because this has failed, because it's trying to map this integer to an enum, but of course we don't have 15, so it can't do anything, so it just gives you the value. This is what we don't need in our program if it's a months program, and we're trying to explicitly stay away from integers. So what we can do in here is we can write an if statement that just says month input is greater than or equal to months.jan, and then we could say and month input is less than or equal to months.december, because we know our upper bound is going to be December and our lower bound is going to be January. Now the problem with this code is that it can't compare an integer to an enum value, even though this does represent 1, as you can see there in the pop-up. So as we did here, we can just convert these to an enum. Or alternatively, we can convert the month input over to the enum. And it doesn't really matter which way you do it. I prefer it if you convert the enums over to an integer, but it's all just personal preference. It works both ways. So now we've compared it and we made sure it's in the range, then we can see what happened. So if we just run it now and we type 15, and it'll skip over this if statement because this will return false and there's nothing that's happening here. So what we can do instead is we can type else, and then we can take these 2 lines of code and then we can add another console.writeline and say please enter a month in the range. And we can have the month output again, and because we don't need to redeclare the integer, we can just remove that so that it will override the value that was previously entered. And we can load it back in, and then we can print this value. There we go. And now if you print something outside, which is 15, then it'll output please enter a month in the range, and then we enter 12, and then it says December. Perfect. To make this a little bit better, we don't need to have this exact same line in both branches of the if statement, because regardless of what happens, you're always going to print it. So if we remove both of these lines, now we realize that this entire statement here is just empty. So we can have something called code guarding. And what code guarding means is you try and eliminate any bad values first before you try and do your prints. So in this case, we want to make sure that the value of month input is between 1 and 12 before it hits this line, otherwise we're going to get a random integer number. So the best thing to do is to remove these, place the bracket back in, and then we need to change this if statement slightly. So what we can do is we can say if the month input is smaller than January, and because January is 1, this would mean if it's 0 or less, and then we could change the and to an or, and then we can change this to greater than. So if it's less than January, or if it's greater than December, then we do this again. So now if you run the program and we type in 12, it types in December. If we run it again and we hit 15, then we does it again and we hit 12, and it works. Now the problem with this is, what if we guess wrong twice and we say 15 and 15, then it's still going to print out 15, and that's a problem because we've only gave them access to printing this out once. So simply all we can do here is change this to a while loop. And now if you run the program, 15, 15, 15, 15, and it'll keep looping until we get it in the range, and then it'll print out December, which is made from this line of code. So you can use a switch if you wanted to, and we can do exactly like we're doing here. We can convert the integer month input to the enum, and then we can place our cases in regards to the enum. So in case of Jan, it says you picked Jan, and from there you can do any other bits of code that you really wanted to inside here instead of just a simple print. So if we run this now and we pick number 1, then it says you picked Jan. Obviously if you were to use a switch statement in this case, you would do something a bit more complicated inside here, but I'm just saying that you can do this if you wanted to. Okay, so let's just have a quick recap. So we made an enum called months, and we gave it some values. At first we gave it the months, and then we realized that January actually started on 0, so we made it equal to 1 and the rest equal to the numbers, just to make sure that there's no mess up. So in essence what we've done is we've created a data type. So now we've used it in our variable called month and assigned the value of months.jan. And then we showed here that you could convert it using this notation, which is called casting. So you can take this value from the variable and then cast it as an integer, so this would return 1 because January is indeed 1. And then we wrote a small program that just converts your numeric number for months into this string representative of it. So it just says please enter a value between 1 and 12, gives you an option to type it in, and as long as it's greater than January and less than or equal to December, then it will skip over this while loop and print out the month. If it passes this range, like you've typed in 0, or you've typed in 13 or -1 and 20, then it'll keep asking you to re-input the value until this gets satisfied. e.g. it's between 1 and 12. And then we just did a simple console print just to make sure that what we're dealing with is correct. And then as an optional part of the program, you could add a switch statement, and if you wanted to do something specific with every single month, then you could just keep on chaining them as is above. So you could just say .feb, and then you can have some code in there, and then you can break this one, and then you can do the next one, and so on and so forth. That's only if you wanted to have specific code for each month. If you didn't want to have specific code for each month, then you probably don't want the switch statements, you could just keep it as the output. I hope that made sense. If you have any comments, please put them below and I'll get back to you. If not, I'll see you in the next one.